Ladies and gentlemen, I'm joined by Athin Cassiotis, and I'm going to have an incredible conversation around his podcast, his business, and he's got a really great podcast. So we're going to talk about that because, we all in some shape or form want to grow businesses or help others grow businesses. And these kind of conversations are like really important to have. I am just excited to get into his story and how this whole podcasting became a thing. But Athin, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. How does it feel to be a podcaster?
Yeah, thanks, Ronsley. Awesome to be here as well. And yeah, it feels awesome to be a podcaster. Once you commit and you get into it, then it's a lot of fun as you go along the journey.
Do you find that people start introducing you as podcaster now? Is that a thing or is that not a thing yet?
Yeah, it's interesting. A podcast host is something that, that I call myself. We live in a social media world and, I get, certain likes and comments on when I post my podcast, but everybody that I see and speak to says, I always see your podcast out there, right? So, I think that's the power of a podcast, that omnipresence of always being out there, being consistent, every week with what you do or however often you do your podcast. And so I'm definitely, building a lot of traction and momentum with it.
So interesting you say consistency because obviously that's a thing in the podcasting world and it happens a lot. And it's one of the things that is not as easy to maintain as well. Everyone goes through different versions of pod fade. Have you had any of that stuff happen to you when you were building this momentum and the traction? Like in your consistency, did you find struggles and what were those struggles, if any?
Not really, actually. I think the biggest thing that I did from the start was commitment, right? I committed to it. I said, like, if I do something, I'm going to do it properly. But I also thought, what's going to be the lowest resistance for me to commit to this? Like, what's going to make it as easy as possible for me to do it? So number one, do it on Zoom, like do a video, right? Easy, because then I don't need a physical place or anything to do that. Interviewing other people, right? If you start just becoming good at interviewing people, you don't have to create a lot of content. You just have to ask great questions, right? And be able to, hold that frame of the interview and the podcast episode. So there were some things there that I organized. And then, yeah, basically just, I had many episodes in the bank. So I think that's a really key thing about consistency is that recording them. And I had at least like 4 or 5 episodes in the bank, which is like, 4 or 5 weeks. So I do a weekly podcast. So if you go on holidays or whatever it is like that, and then the momentum builds. So that would be the biggest thing is making sure like before you launch is having at least a few in the bank so that you can stay consistent and then you're really committed to the process.
I love all the things you're saying. So obviously, you focusing on the interview is probably something that you focus on a lot and you probably prepare for it. And even when I asked you earlier, I mean, we can totally do this recording straight after this. And you're like, no, I want any time to prepare. And I love that for a variety of different reasons. It's like I was just talking at another session early just before us. And I was saying how important it is to just love the game and just become a student of the game. And that way you're not having to be the guru all the time or have all the knowledge all the time and come in as the expert. And you come in as the expert, your cup is already full. You have nothing more to learn but you come in as the student of the game and it's so different. Do you see that? I mean, you talk a lot about mindset on your podcast and business mindset. What are some of those elements that come into play when it comes to business?
Yeah, it's so true. And, I love business. I love the podcast. I love about mindset and like the preparation side of things. I just want to make sure that I really, start really well and I'm asking great questions beforehand. And I put myself under a lot of pressure. That's what I do. Like I literally do it like half an hour before the podcast. I find that I get a lot of performance out of myself by doing it sort of last minute. So yeah, otherwise, what is it? Parkinson's law, I think, where the amount of time that you give yourself is how much time that you take to do a task. And I use that to my advantage for the podcast. So yeah, I'd like to do that later. But I guess from the mindset side of things, like you're mentioning, I think mindset is so important in business as well as in life. But if we talk about, from in business, then, I can teach the same strategies to 10 different people and I get 10 different answers or 10 different results, right? Because everyone's got a different mindset. It's in the unconscious mind. So we need to be able to have coaches or other types of methods to be able to uncover what's holding us back. Because it could be one little belief, like, podcasting is hard. If you think that podcasting is hard, then what's going to happen? You're probably not going to do a podcast, right? Whereas if we change that and saying podcast is easy or podcasting is fun or whatever that is for you, and you keep telling yourself that every day, you're going to love the game. You're going to love doing podcasts. Doing the opposite of the negative is definitely going to be the best thing of what you want to focus on. But sometimes you might not have any limiting beliefs about podcasting, but you just want to start loving it. Whether it's anything that you do in life, mindset is extremely important. I remember doing a session with a client making a few $1 million a year, and I was hearing all this negative stuff. I go, listen, I think we just need to do a mindset session. And I did this mindset session, and he said to me after, he goes, that was worth the whole year of coaching with you, that one session, right? And he had his biggest month ever that next month after I did that session with him. So that's how powerful, getting your mindset right can be.
Yeah, it's huge, especially if there's someone that's already doing certain reps, right? The fact that that person got the result is because a coach came in and said, hey, change your stance a little bit here, and you just suddenly winning all the points because your biggest strength is coming out in this absolutely insane way because you've been developing and you've been doing some sort of reps. But it's really important to understand the reps and to see how committed you are to the podcasting reps is kind of cool, because it's like, that's really what's required. And people don't like the answer when they ask me, so what does it take to make a successful podcast? And I'm like, consistency and sticking to the concept of your show. So let's talk about your show. And ladies and gentlemen, if you're liking all this stuff, like Athin Cassiotis is where you go. AthinCassiotis.com, and get his 6 keys to a bulletproof business mindset, because we're just talking about how important that is. So if you're already doing the reps and you're like, hey, like one of these key things could totally help me, just go and download that from his website. So let's talk about the podcast. How did it come about? What was the process like? How did you think about it? What happened and how did it start? Give us that backstory.
Yeah. So I think a lot of people have probably thought about doing a podcast. I know I had, before I did it for many years, and basically, listen to Joe Rogan or whoever you listen to, right? And then it's just sort of been in the back of my mind, maybe I should do it. And then I was just on one of my coaching calls, a virtual one with one of my coaches in the US. And I was being very strategic and I was asking very high quality questions, because if you start asking high quality questions, you start to get noticed, right? Because it's not just a standard question. So that was a little strategy, a little pro tip of mine to be noticed in a big room of people online. And then he messaged me, and he's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, right? And he said, you need to have a podcast, you need a show. I'm like, okay, cool. If someone's worth that much money tells me to do that, they just solidified this thought that I've been having for a few years before that I need to do this. Okay, cool. So I've been thinking about these few names to him, I said, and he goes, yep, I love the Business Growth Show. Let's do that one. You can interview me as one of your first interviews, he said to me as well. Let's get this show on the road, basically. And I said, all right, done. So then at that point, I'm like, I'm committing to this, right? Like if ever I do something like I've already mentioned, I have to commit. The first episode was just a little bit on mindset. I wanted to touch on mindset by myself. That's the only episode I've done by myself. I potentially might do more in the future, but then every other episode from there is interviewing people. And basically I thought to myself, well, it's the Business Growth Show. I wanted to keep it wide on purpose as well, because to me, yes, there's power in niches, if you want to go a bit more specific on that, but I like width because it gives me more flexibility in the show, because it allows me to talk about all areas of business, and mindset is also a part about business, and even, how the business affects your life and everything like that. So there's a lot of different ways. So I had that analogy from the start to give myself flexibility. And then I basically just reached out to my network. I'm quite connected, right? And even more so now with all the podcast episodes. And I thought, who are some great people that, are successful in their own right in different areas, and just started reaching out to them, saying, hey, I'd love to, for you to be on my podcast, and get those first few down the line, and then, building it from there. And it was very basic to begin with. Like, just, you don't have to start with all the whiz bang stuff as well. Like I literally had like a standard camera, the same camera I do now. I didn't even have a proper microphone when I first started. And then, just kept going from there. And it's amazing, how much you learn from these people by asking great questions. And I think it's all about the power of the question, because there's so many times that I've done interviews where people have said, I've been interviewed so many times and no one's ever asked me that question. So I always challenge myself to go, how can I ask something different when I've interviewed massive people, and obviously some general, normal people as well that are entrepreneurs, and you never know who you're going to meet and then what's going to transpire from that. I think that's, part of what I love about it is the relationships. Yes, we want to hope that, it obviously builds our authority, our credibility and everything like that, but the relationships and the knowledge that you get from the podcast, I think is invaluable.
Yeah, massive. What other equipment do you like? What would you consider, equipment to get started? And then also, if you can also tell us, what are your process to prep before you hit record?
Yeah, so I just have a simple Logitech, 1080p HD camera that I use. I'm still using it today. It still looks, still decent quality. I don't think you need anything massive, right? To do stuff with your computer there. Then I'm obviously using the Blue Yeti, which Ronsley loves. So I've been using that since mostly, from the start as well. I think lighting's very cool. So I definitely recommend having like 2 lights, which I normally have on either side. Now it could be ring lights. I actually have box lights, which are more professional, to almost like photo shoot type lights. So I think lighting's really important there. Like I think sound's the most important normally. Obviously you want to have a decent video, but the lighting to be there. So that's the tech side of things, really. Nice and simple, nothing too flash. Now, with how I prepare, and I think this is important, everybody does it a little bit differently. Now, I asked for a bio more recently as well. So if you can ask from a bio from someone, it can make it easier for you to introduce the person. But a lot of the time, I haven't gotten anything from people before. So I literally create their bio, for the show beforehand. So I look at their website, look at their social media, and I'll just create all this bio from them. It makes it easier for me as the host. And then basically, I think about what questions do I want to ask? There might be a few standard questions, but I think the best tip that I can give to people, if you've got a podcast, is ask the questions that you're curious about knowing the answer. Like, what do you really want to know the answer to? Because the energy when you ask that question is going to be different, because you're really going to be on the edge of your seat going, I really want to be paying attention to this. And you never know, it might go down a little bit of a rabbit hole and everything like that later. So really preparing some questions, but also allowing for, flexibility and being intuitive and, in the podcast as well, not being too regimented. So I just sort of, let my intuition, instincts guide me through that podcast of where I should go. And then, do a bit of a wrap up and what I think about the person, and then their links and how we can contact them and everything like that. And then I wrap up the show. So I have a simple intro, the body, I guess. Then I sort of wrap up and make sure everyone knows, everything about the host. And then I wrap up the show. That's the general gist. I know you're big on AI, Ronsley, as well. So I have more recently in the last month, tried a bit of chat GPT, some tools for some questions, just to do it. So it just helps speed it up. I still do my own questions because I think chat GPT isn't going to ask you those really cool questions, but it could give me a few questions like this, to add in, but then I'll really think about what's going to be, some really, really valuable questions there.
Yeah, huge. I mean, I want to talk about the AI bit, but before that, I want to cover what you just said, because you spoke about bio, which is a huge deal. I love that idea. Then you become such top of mind. If all you did was focus on creating a unique bio, even when they give you the bio, that would be, super valuable. It almost makes me want to do it, but I don't have that skill like you do. But when you say that you look at website and social, what's a checklist like? Like, what do you go through in that time? Like, what are you looking at? What are you making sure that you click on, and how are you gathering all this information?
Yeah. Now, remember, I'm doing everything in about 30 minutes here, right? And this is just before the podcast. Let's say I'm creating a bio from scratch. I would look at the website, just going, okay, what is this person about? I look at their socials, especially LinkedIn on socials. I find is better. You get more information because you know a bit of their history as well on LinkedIn compared to the other platforms. And just basically look through it, seeing what they're calling themselves, their little titles there, or what their positions are further down the line, what have they got in their about section. And then, looking on the website, just on the main homepage, or there might be some subsections if it's specific to what we're doing. And then I'm going, okay, well, like in LinkedIn, for example, you've got creator mode, right? And that gives you 5 hashtags. So that could be 5 potential topics, right? That you could speak about in the podcast as an example, that you go, okay, this person knows a lot of stuff about these 5 areas. So that's an easy way for you to understand topics as an example. But I might not just ask them about that, but they can give me a start if they don't give me any, inkling about what to do. So that's basically how I do it. And then just put things together. If it's about the bio, if they've got an about section on their website about them, then I can sort of use some elements from that. But if it's about the questions, look at those elements about what they teach, but then think about, if I, what do I really want to know in this element, and really think about it. And also, when I'm structuring these questions, I also think about a flow as well. Like, what do we want to start? Because you probably want to start a little bit base level sometimes of things, and then sort of get deeper as we go in the podcast. So I do this very quickly, but I'm very strategic. And it's funny, right? Where so many times I've been in the podcast where I've asked a question and I know what the next question will be. And then right at the end of their answer, that they mention what I'm going to ask next. Basically, I'm like, well, that's a perfect segue. It's happened so many times, right? Because I understand, how things flow in business in topics anyway. So it's a natural progression. So that's some of the things that I do, to prepare in that area there, and get ready to hit the ground running, soon after.
Love it. Love it. Let's talk about AI because I think it's really important at this particular juncture. Because when you were saying all that stuff, I mean, we're coming out with a new podcast called AI Geeks, and it is a growth tactic that, you use in business, and how to use AI to like get more accurate with it, get more efficient with it, get it done quicker. So different growth tactics. And I wrote down the growth tactic of like how to really prepare well for an interview. But then I thought, wait, forget that. I'm going to ask Athin here, if you were looking for a business growth tactic to be done faster, better, quicker with AI, what would that be? And I'm super curious. So do you have any thoughts on that? Like business growth tactics that can be improved or like made quicker?
Yeah, so I think a lot of it probably comes down to the like the production side of things, right? Where the AI can really do a lot of area there. So I have like a full-time, VA, and I've trained her to do a lot of that for me. So to be able to, create, show notes and a few other things like that, and to be able to create a teaser video. But this takes, a bit of a time and everything like that. So I think, well, what's a way that maybe the show notes can be automated? But I think the biggest value in the AI is actually creating the videos, right? Because there's so much content there, but I don't really create more because it takes time. Is there a way that we can do this? And I know there are a couple of tools out there, more recently that are doing that, but I've heard that they may not be the best yet in terms of what they're doing. People are like, yeah, I'm not sure about these videos. Most of them are pretty average, as an example, but there might be a couple that you use. So is there a way that, we can use AI to create different videos? Now, this could be square videos. It could be like, long form, short form videos, all that type of stuff, different elements. How is the picture being taken? Is it like, just the one person on the screen? Is it two people next to each other? How does that change the way that, the video is edited, right? So does the AI understand that and can put, algorithms in place on how that does? If that could spit all that out and then, you put into some system that could put, automatically out there, I think that would save huge amounts of time and then just get you out there into the market more. And then, you would likely then get a lot more listeners, a lot more eyeballs on you, which will then hopefully, grow your business, right? Because you've got a lot more people knowing about what you do, that authority element to then, help them in whatever way you want.
Love it. Love it. And so if you're obviously listening now and you're looking forward to that, go find AI Geeks when it gets released, because we're just starting to record it. And it's like so much fun to actually take a genuine growth tactic and taking that and using AI to do it in like minutes, like sometimes seconds. Like it's the speed is absolutely crazy. And the speed of getting input and taking that input and using it again to get the ultimate outcome of what would have normally taken months, sometimes way more longer to achieve. Like I remember when my first business, like an online presence for, was this chefing business, and I had like people that would hire full-time chefs to come into their homes and cook their meals for them. So to get their pain points and their problems and their mistakes and how they were behaving took me so long to like, find out whether it worked. And then even to get people podcasting, like when I started, it was 11 years ago. I had to tell people what a podcast was. They didn't know what a podcast was at all. And even understanding that or not knowing that, now that I can just use a chat to find out where my audience is at this current moment and whether I can create something that can actually help them, I think we're on this really crazy point. Let's talk about the business aspect of your podcast. When someone asks you about return, hey, Athin, does this return on investment, or does this return on time? Does it return on scalability? Like, how would you answer that?
Yeah, it's a very complex answer, this one, right? And I think don't assume that after a few episodes or 10 episodes that you're going to get like an ROI in the podcast, right? It's a long-term game. Joe Rogan was 10, 15 years plus before he got, $100 million from Spotify, right? To go on there for the podcast. So believe that you're going to be doing this for, potentially a year or more before you're probably going to start seeing, some sort of ROI. So be in it from the long haul, from the beginning. I guess the key thing about what a podcast does, it elevates you as an authority, right? And a lot of credibility. So in whatever that topic is and whatever you're doing, it puts you out there and starts to build trust with your audience. They need to see you a lot more. And it's funny that, so many times everyone keeps seeing me, and then someone will find me on a social platform, like one was on LinkedIn, and just looked me up, looked up my podcast videos, booked a time to book a call with me. And then I signed them up, as a 12-month client. And I said, oh, how'd you find me? I found you here, and I looked at your podcast videos and everything like that. And then, I signed them up, and that was a decent deal, right? To work with them for that. So that's because I've built that up over time. So how are you then obviously getting more eyeballs on yourself and monetizing it? There's obviously a lot of, different strategies depending on where you're at and how much you want to invest into that. But I think about it in the long haul, and it might not be a direct monetization. Like you need a lot of, listeners and followers, as you would know, Ronsley, to be able to get sponsors, right? In a podcast. And it's, huge amounts. That could take years, and it may never happen for you potentially on how big your podcast gets. So don't think that, oh, I've got all these listeners and you get $100 a month or something like that from a sponsor. Like it's not going to be the sponsorship revenue necessarily unless you get ridiculously massive, right?
Yeah.
Which could happen. It's going to be more from people seeing the podcast and reaching out to you, that you then get clients from that, which is sort of indirectly from it. That's what I've found the ROI, and I've made decent money, right, from that, where people are seeing it and wanting to work with me in that different area. So so many ways that it can be monetized, but think about it in that way for the long haul, and that's where you're going to get the ROI.
So I want to land this plane, and I want to kind of do this in a couple of ways. I think the first thing is I want to ask you about the strategies that you've tried to get more eyeballs on your podcast, like what has worked for you, and also the idea about how does the relationship part, like, can you elaborate first on what the strategies are and then the relationship factor and how that ties into the business aspect?
Yeah, definitely. So really getting the eyeballs and stuff on it, there's a lot of different ways, but the SEO perspective is really key. So just to go back one step, so my podcast is hosted in Anchor, which is now Spotify for podcasters because they've bought it. So that's where it's always been hosted, and that farms it out to Spotify, Apple, Google, etc. Right, all the podcast platforms. And it's also hosted in YouTube. So I record on video, and the video is also on Spotify now because they have video, but that's on YouTube. So understanding the SEO game of YouTube as well as other areas is really important. So I've recently, looked into that and going, okay, what do I need to change in terms of the titles, in terms of the descriptions and everything like that in YouTube and things, so people find me? Because a lot of the time, it's YouTube where people are seeing it, right? As not just, on the podcast, because people want video content now, what I'm finding, right? It's not just the audio element to what they're doing, and they're searching for things online. So yes, you want a lot of eyeballs on the normal podcast and get it like that, but having the SEO perspective is really important. Obviously putting it on your social media platforms and everything like that, and how you're getting people involved to be able to watch that, and reaching out to people. So many times, whether it was YouTube or podcast, I'd just be direct messaging people saying, hey, are you happy to subscribe to my podcast or anything like that? And happy to, reciprocate, the law of reciprocation, right? How can we help each other in business? Happy to like your page or subscribe to your thing or whatever it is like that. So how can you reach out and use my VA or things like that to be able to reach out to people directly too? And then obviously with the other person, so when I give them, the information and the graphics and stuff after to the person I've interviewed. So hopefully they share it then with their audience as well. And that can also then get people to subscribe and listen to the podcast in that way. So that's some strategies that I've used to do that. The other thing you mentioned was about relationships. So I think this is the biggest thing about the podcast. And, it's a very unique skill to get these people. And it's all about, how you approach people. I think once you get one big name, it's easier to get other big names. So it's like, how do you get the first big name initially? And it's a lot of the time through relationships. It's always thinking about who is connected to that person, and then how can I provide value to that person as well, right? Beforehand, because it's in relationships, it's all about value. How can I add value? That's always the way you should think with relationships, especially if someone is, more successful or, is connected in different ways and you want to build a relationship with them. It's not like a science necessarily. It's a little bit of an art about how you ask it and when you do it, because there's a lot of different factors. There's a thing called like situational awareness, right? Understanding the person, the situation, when is the right time to ask or not ask. Same as the sale, right? Sometimes it's not good to ask for the sale in business because of depending on where that person's at or the conversation's at, and it might be better to do it at a later time. So you need to have situational awareness of when to do that. And then I've been able to interview, big people that way. So find out how you can connect with these people, add value, and then work out when's the right time to ask to be connected to other relationships. Because sometimes, even just being connected to somebody else that's of a decent stature and then getting that, even that's just a great way to connect and then build the network. And you never know. Yes, ideally you can foster these relationships at a later time and do something together. But even just being connected to more people, you never know, 6 degrees, right, of separation, as people say, how we can connect to different people in different ways. So that's some of the strategies that I use. It's so different, obviously, for every person, right? And ask. I think most people are afraid of asking, like, to be on, I think that's the biggest thing is, yes, you can get a no from people. And many times, I've been ghosted, right, from there. And, that's okay. And understand that being, like that rejected, it's like do cold calling for 6 months. That's what I recommend to everybody so that you get a lot of rejection, because then you're okay with no, because it doesn't matter. But most people are too afraid to ask. But then when you ask and you ask it in a nice way and you've provided value, then normally, that will happen and it'll work for you and you'll get, more than you didn't get. So that would be some very big tips about, building relationships and getting people on your show.
Amazing. That was a long runway to land this plane. But ladies and gentlemen, Athin Cassiotis is where you go. All those links are going to be in the show notes. Go get his 6 keys to a bulletproof business mindset. It's on his website. And also check out his podcast. It's all about growing your business and doing it in the right way. So thank you for joining us, Athin. This has been an absolute pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Ronsley. It's been awesome to be here as well, mate. You've got an awesome podcast. Look forward to interviewing you soon as well.
Thanks, man. Thanks, buddy.